It is unknown at this time the low level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that might actually destroy life, because plant life all depends, as you know, Secretary, plant life all depends on CO2. And when we kill it, then we're done too.
Why do you think 195 countries in the world, their prime ministers, their presidents...
Because they're grifting like you are, sir.
That's a pretty shocking statement, that you believe that all the scientists in the world are grifters, honestly.
Not all scientists agree with you, Mr. Secretary.
98% of all the scientists in the world...
Science isn't about agreement. It's not about consensus. You know that.
Climate change is just a way of redistribution of wealth. There is no climate change. We're always going to have climate change because the ice age never came, and also the heating age or global warming never came, which is why they've changed it to climate change. And you can sit there and argue all you want to about that, but we all know the truth.
Thank you, Representative, for making the case why we need to fund more money into education, into our public schools, so we can educate our students and they don't grow up with these conspiracy theories. And we're living in this alternative universe of conspiracy theories that are not rooted in fact and not rooted in what we can see with our own eyes and what we're experiencing in the world right now. And so I have no other words, but let us invest in education so we do not have lawmakers who have this mentality.
From day one, when Joe Biden took the oath of office, he issued an all-out assault on American energy. President Biden's war on fossil fuels doesn't cover all oil and gas. It only covers American oil and gas. And maybe that's the most perplexing part of his failed policies that angers people. And people have figured this out.
We have this thing called climate change that's taking place. And right now, especially in the state of Texas, we are losing so much of our farmland because of this thing called climate change. We just had wildfires that destroyed fires. We know that right now, when it comes to our sugar crops, we're having issues because it takes 6 years just to raise a sugar crop. So guess what? We've got to be creative. And honestly, if we would allow the Republicans to continue to decide on what we are going to do when it relates to energy, well, by gosh darn it, I think we'd still be in horse and buggy.
Now, the problem here is that many in the climate movement have endorsed radical environmentalism instead of rational environmentalism. To be a radical environmentalist is to ignore goals like adaptation and innovation and instead pursue only prevention, which is an impossible goal.
We're going to see this select committee eliminated right away by our Republican colleagues, and that's really too bad, because I think it shows that as much as they have pivoted from outright climate denial, we still see a stubborn refusal to acknowledge this as the crisis that it is. It deserves a select committee focused on decarbonization and the transition to clean energy. And unfortunately, under the Republican majority, we are not going to get it.
Looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals laid out by the United Nations that the representative is challenging, let's go through them. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace and justice through strong institutions and partnerships to achieve the goal. I don't understand why these are things that we would oppose as a state. This bill seems like it's rooted in a conspiracy theory that somehow the United Nations is trying to override our local decisions, when what these goals and what the Sustainable Development Goals are laying out is that we are not an island, that we are members of a global world house, a global community, and that when we look at the issue of the climate crisis, we have to address it as a world. We cannot be in our silos. And so I don't understand the impetus for this bill to oppose those goals laid out by the United Nations that I think we should all agree with. Because the truth be told, these goals are not for us, they're for our children and grandchildren. We want them to have a world with clean water and clean air. We want them to have a world in which they can flourish and not be devastated by the climate catastrophe that we're facing. And so I think that this bill is a step in the wrong direction, saying that we won't cooperate with sustainable development goals of the international community because we think that when the climate crisis hits, it's not going to hit Tennessee, when the truth be told, it's already hitting us in Tennessee. We've experienced extreme drought. The Mississippi River has been at its lowest level. We've experienced tornadoes and floods. And so we should be working with the international community as a nation, as a beloved community, to advance these interests laid out by the United Nations. And so I just think that, again, this is a very troubling proposal that's rooted in conspiracy theories, that's rooted in this type of exceptionalism, and very dangerous anti-human rights, anti-democracy frameworks that is a large part of this body right now. And so my question to you is, what are your issues with those development goals laid out by the United Nations representative, and why would we oppose them when the international community has agreed on these things and we are a part of the international community?
Chairman Powers.
Oh, thank you for that question. And first of all, when I was in high school in 1970, Time magazine came out. The front page article said, "The ice age cometh. We're going into a global freeze." Well, the program started up a few years ago about global warming. All of a sudden, we figured out we don't have global warming, so they changed it to climate change. We are not obligated to do what the United Nations tells us to do, and we never will be, because we have a Constitution of the United States and we have a Constitution of the state of Tennessee. We're not obligated to the United Nations in any way.
What you said was very troubling to me. I'm just very thrown aback. And I'm glad that we have that on the record, what you said. And I hope your district looks at what you said, because that is very troubling, that we're challenging science, we're challenging reality, and we're living in this alternative universe of conspiracy theories that are not rooted in fact and not rooted in what we can see with our own eyes and what we're experiencing in the world right now. And so I have no other words, but let us invest in education so we do not have lawmakers who have this mentality.
Thank you, Secretary. In an attempt to get to net zero by 2050, do you support the administration's goal of cutting U.S. emissions in half by 2030?
Yes, I do.
Secretary, in 1997, the Senate voted 95-0, including you and then Senator Biden, in favor of the Byrd-Hagel resolution, which resolved that the U.S. shouldn't cut emissions until China, Mexico, India, Brazil, South Korea, and other so-called developing nations cut emissions as well. Do you remember that?
I do very, very well, because I was managing it on the floor of the Senate.
Since 97, have emissions from China, India, and Mexico all increased?
Yes, as they have from the United States.
And global emissions have continued to increase as well, right?
Yes.
Have any of those countries submitted a credible plan to get to net zero emissions by 2050?
Which countries?
Let's just go with China, India, or Mexico.
No.
It seems that, have you abandoned your position that those other nations would cut emissions before Americans would have to make choices between the groceries on their table and paying for these policies?
I think the reality is that the world changed in that period of time. Let me explain
okay,
to you.
So you voted that way, but
let me explain to you the vote, because I did manage this on the floor. And I know exactly what happened, because I'm the one who said to our colleagues, I think everybody ought to vote for this. And the reason was that it fundamentally had the message that it's not fair. The one we were talking about earlier with the chairman, it's not fair for us to be reducing, and China, which was producing 3 times more emissions than us, and then producing goods that come into our country from that dirty power, and we have a problem. So we wanted to address that. But we knew not every aspect of that piece of legislation is what you all call, we all call, a message. It was a message vote. And the vote was clear. We wanted other people to join us in the effort to reduce emissions.
Okay, fair enough.
That hasn't happened sufficiently.
It hasn't happened sufficiently. Now, Secretary, in 2015 at the Paris Climate Conference, you said that if all industrial nations go to zero emissions, it wouldn't be enough. And then at the White House's Climate Day in January of 21, you said almost 90% of the planet's emissions come from outside the U.S. We could go to zero tomorrow and the problem isn't solved. And in April 21, you told the Washington Post that even the U.S. and China going to zero emissions tomorrow won't solve the climate's problem. Then in April 21, you said that global net zero is not enough and that CO2 must be removed from the atmosphere. How much is the correct amount of CO2?
Let me explain to you, if I can, so you understand exactly what I said. It's close, but it's not quite exactly. what I was saying.
Can you
what
just
I'm
tell me
saying,
what
let
the
me tell you what I'm
correct
saying.
amount is?
I'm going to tell you what the correct. Here's how it works. Because we have put, I forget the exact number of tons, millions of tons of CO2 and other greenhouse gases are now in the atmosphere. They're there. And every day we're adding more. And so every day the heat is going up, and we have to figure out how we're going to, tame the monster here. The only way to do that is to reduce emissions on an ongoing basis to get control on the current level of emissions that we have created.
But
and
what
then,
is
then
but
to
what is
actually
the correct,
suck?
sir?
you're
With all
gonna
due
have to-
respect, you've been through
let me
this
just
before.
finish.
What is the correct amount? I don't want to spend a bunch of time about a history lesson about things that people don't care about.
What changes every day?
What's
I can't tell you
the
exactly
correct
what
amount
it's
change.
in the yes, it does.
So,
Because we're-
Secretary, you probably know that for approximately 200 million years, what's the parts per million now? About 400, right? Can we
it's
agree
over
on that?
400.
All right.
It's
For
about,
about 200
420.
million years, 2,000 parts per million. Did Mother Nature get it wrong for 200 million years?
Here's the difference, Congressman. The difference is, yes, there were periods which all the scientists who deal with climate acknowledge that there have been moments on the planet, which is billions of years old, in which there were greater heat and there was greater
Tell me the
carbon
difference
dioxide.
quickly. I've got a
The
limited
difference
amount of
is
time.
human beings are creating
Okay, so
this. That's the difference.
So human beings are
We are
about
creating
300,000 years old, but during these periods of time where it was 2,000 parts per million, life existed. As a matter of fact, we're in
not
one
people,
of the lowest
not
periods.
human
Mr.
beings walking
Secretary,
around.
We're in one
No.
of the lowest periods of carbon in the atmosphere in not only recorded history, in the history of life existing on the planet.
Congressman, let me just say that I don't agree with what you're saying out there for any number of reasons. I don't have time to go into all of them now, but I'll just tell you point blank that the difference between the periods you're looking at in terms of heat, et cetera, and human input is night and day, number one. Number two, why do you think 195 countries in the world, their prime ministers, their presidents.
Because they're grifting like you are, sir.
That's a pretty shocking statement, that you believe that all the scientists in the world are grifters, honestly.
Not all scientists agree with you, Mr. Secretary.
98% of all the scientists in the world.
Science isn't about agreement. It's not about consensus. You know that.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Sherfilis McCormick for 5 minutes.
We in Congress have a critical role to play in combating climate change and in investing in clean energy. And climate change is real, and it's caused by human actions. And it's imperative that we act strongly to address the crisis. We're seeing storms and extreme weather we haven't seen before in this country because of climate change. And last summer, Vermonters weathered extreme flooding that left many communities devastated, and we're still actually rebuilding from that catastrophe. And this winter, Vermont has seen record low snowfall amounts, and maple sugar makers are starting the tapping season the earliest ever. So we see in Vermont, up close, how climate change threatens the crop yields, the infrastructure, water and energy supplies, human health, and creates looming disaster assistance needs. It also threatens our economy. There's no question. In 2021 and 2022, the United States had 35 separate billion-dollar extreme weather and climate-related disaster events, costing more than $180 billion in direct economic losses. Congressional Democrats and President Biden have tackled this issue head-on. Last Congress, the Inflation Reduction Act made the greatest federal investment in history to fight climate change. It invested nearly $400 billion in climate solutions and clean technologies to deliver the single greatest investment in combating the climate crisis in American history. It also lowers costs for American families, creating jobs here at home, advancing climate justice, and positioning the United States as the global leader in clean energy. What we're dealing with today are Republican policies that consistently put polluters over people and jeopardize our family and our planet's futures. Republicans' H.R. 1, their number one priority this Congress, is a massive giveaway to corporate polluters. It guts our bedrock environmental laws and jeopardizes clean air and safe drinking water. I'm here today calling on my colleagues not to roll back the investments that we've made to improve our future.
The burden of his expansion of government regulatory regimes is borne by small businesses, innovators, and yes, American families. This amendment seeks to replace deregulation section of our budget policy to encourage more spending on Green New Deal policies. The Inflation Reduction Act included billions of taxpayer dollars dedicated to these progressive climate provisions that President Biden and the Democrats put in place several years ago. I would encourage my colleagues to take a look at something I commend Representative Gary Palmer from Alabama has put together in the policy booklet. Go through and actually look at what the UN panel on climate change actually says. To quote them and not be able to go to look at the specificity of what they actually say, they talk about flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, and drought wildfire combos. You know what they say? They said that there's no causation and effect in the United States for those things on climate change. Yet every media outlet and every talking point up here that wants to advance the Church of Nature ideology always contends the opposite of what the UN themselves in their own panel actually says.
Climate change is here and it's having a catastrophic effect. It's not just a threat to our small businesses, but also our agricultural industry, our natural resources, our very livelihoods. It's a threat to our survival, our community's survival. We need budgets that create and sustain good-paying green jobs, enable our farmers to withstand climate change, protect people living in our low-lying areas from flooding, and transition us to a clean energy economy. This is not just about the here and now, it's about the future, and I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to the budget resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentlelady from Vermont. The question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Ms. Balint. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Ms. Balint asked for a recorded vote pursuant to our unanimous consent, our being me and the ranking member. We'll postpone the roll call vote until later in the markup. Are there any other amendments?